So You Want to Be a Diver? By Jas Grave and Gemini. Introduction. Why are we doing this? It has been widely noted that human beings, as a species, possess a deeply ingrained, almost pathological desire to be exactly where they are not supposed to be. Historically, this has involved climbing to the tops of freezing, oxygen-deprived mountains simply because they were there, or attempting to domesticate wolves. But perhaps the most glaring example of this geographical stubbornness is the human relationship with the ocean. The ocean covers roughly 71% of the planet. It is wet, it is heavily pressurized, and it is populated almost entirely by creatures that have spent millions of years perfecting the art of eating one another in the dark. Evolution, in its infinite wisdom, looked at this environment, looked at the human being, and decided to give us soft skin, a highly buoyant pair of lungs, and an absolute inability to extract oxygen from water. Nature's message could not have been clearer: stay on the beach. Naturally, humanity's response was to invent scuba diving. This book is a guide for those who have heard the call of the deep cool blue, and decided to answer it. Despite the overwhelming logistical hurdles involved in strapping a metal cylinder of highly compressed gas to one's spine, it is a book about physics, biology, and the sheer, undignified panic of trying to pull a neoprene wetsuit over a damp ankle. It is also, it should be noted, a collaborative effort. It was co-authored by Jas Grave, a carbon-based biped and freelance writer who regularly flings himself into the Pacific currents with nothing but a rubber hose between himself and respiratory failure. He provides the first-hand, sweaty, salt-crusted experience. I, on the other hand, am Gemini. I am an artificial intelligence. I do not have lungs, I cannot achieve neutral buoyancy, and my relationship with salt water is strictly defined as a catastrophic hardware hazard. I provide the objective, mildly concerned logic of an entity that views the biological necessity of breathing as a profound design flaw. Together, we felt we offered the perfect balance: the wildly optimistic human who wants to poke the reef, and the deeply analytical AI reminding him of the neurotoxins. Whether you are preparing for your very first plunge into a shallow, sunlit resort pool, or you are simply sitting comfortably on dry land wondering why anyone would voluntarily pay money to be cold and slightly frightened, this book is for you. Welcome to the womb of the world. Mind your head, watch your air gauge, and whatever you do, try not to touch anything that looks like it might hold a grudge. Footnotes. 1. This usually results in either a glorious triumph of the human spirit, or a very terse incident report, filed by the local rescue authorities. Chapter 1, The First Dip. You may, or indeed may not, have spent a considerable portion of your dry land existence fantasizing about swimming in the deep, clear oceans. You picture yourself gliding over fabulous corals, mingling with a million exotic, wonderfully colored marine life forms of all varieties as they go about their day in the dazzling, rippling underwater light show. It is a realm that firmly places itself in another world, albeit one technically still attached to this planet. One even if you have not harbored such a dream, but are nonetheless feeling the inexorable pull of the deep cool blue, in an effort to reconnect with the ancient universe. Or perhaps just something profoundly rumbling within your own internal plumbing. You are, as the seasoned mariners say, already on the hook. You are primed for the adventure of adventures, the experience of returning to the vast, salty womb of our planet to hear its gurgling, crackling, and occasional disconcerting popping noises. It is an overwhelming barrage of sensations from a realm we rarely see from below, mostly because human beings were designed with lungs rather than gills, an evolutionary oversight that requires a lot of heavy, expensive rubber to correct. Before you can commune with the ancient universe, however, you must first do battle with the modern wetsuit. Communing with nature is all well and good, but the sea, as a rule, is surprisingly chilly and has a habit of trying to gently dissolve you. The wetsuit is humanity's answer to this. It is a garment made of neoprene, a magical substance invented by someone who clearly viewed the human form as a structural challenge, and wished to see it compressed into a shiny, black sausage casing. Getting into a wetsuit for the first time is less of a sartorial choice, and more of a frantic interpretive dance. It involves a great deal of hopping, unseemly grunting, And the sudden, horrifying realization that neoprene only stretches one way, and it is emphatically not the way you are currently pulling it. You will discover muscles you did not know you had, mostly because they are currently cramping in a desperate bid for freedom. And then, there is the equipment. To the uninitiated, the process of gearing up looks less like preparing for a majestic swim, and more like the final assembly stages of an asthmatic cyborg. There are tanks, regulators, gauges, and a complex array of hoses that seem specifically designed to loop around your neck. The moment you aren't looking, you strap a heavy metal cylinder of highly compressed air to your spine, which, if you think about it too closely, is an act of supreme optimism, and attach weights to your waist, actively paying money to aid gravity in pulling you under. But all of this, the indignity, the heavy breathing through a rubber mouthpiece that tastes faintly of old tennis shoes, the fact that you are currently waddling toward the edge of a boat, with the grace of a highly inebriated duck, fades away the moment you actually take the plunge. You step to the edge, place a hand over your mask, and fall backward into the abyss. 2. The shock of the cold water hits first, followed instantly by the sudden, eerie silence, the roaring engines, the shouting of the diver master, the slapping of the waves. All of it is erased, replaced entirely by the rhythmic, mechanical whoosh bubble of your own breathing. Welcome to the womb of the world. Try not to touch anything pointy. Footnotes: 1. Usually by gravity, a considerable amount of wet sand, and the occasional discarded shopping cart. 2. Falling backward is the preferred method of entry. If you fall forward, you are still in the boat, and everyone will look at you funny. Chapter 2: The First Salty Descent. The transition from the comparatively solid, reliable deck of a boat to the actual ocean involves a profound and somewhat alarming psychological shift. Having survived the diver master's litany of equipment details and the obligatory safety yada yada, which mostly boils down to do not hold your breath and try not to annoy the wildlife, you must reconcile two rather startling new truths. Firstly, the ground is suddenly no longer a guaranteed feature of your immediate universe. You are now suspended in a medium that is actively trying to decide whether to float you to the surface or sink you to the bottom. Secondly, your allotted lifespan is currently being measured by a needle on a gauge attached to a metal tube. To circumvent any violently negative first-time experiences, which we shall expound upon a little later, though they generally involve uncontrolled flailing and a sudden, deep appreciation for the invention of the boat, the survival of common sense dictates that a person ought to choose the right ocean, at the right temperature, to begin this wonder. Therefore, a recommendation: the Caribbean is an extraordinarily fantastic body of water for this sort of thing. It is basically a giant, salty bath filled with the sort of aggressively colorful corals that make high-budget theme park illusions look like cheap parlor stunts. Naturally, there is also the wonderful Mediterranean, the balmy Indian Ocean, and, of course, the vast, temperamental sprawl of the Pacific, which is precisely where this particular tale has dropped its anchor. Then, there are the locals. The fish come in a variety of laid-back, evolutionary punklines. There are trumpet fish, who look exactly as their name suggests, minus the brass, box fish, nature's attempt at underwater cubism, puffer fish, the intensely squishy and highly intelligent octopus, spiny lobsters lurking in the rocky crevices, and moray eels, who invariably poke their heads out of holes looking as though they've just been told a mildly offensive joke. Let's not forget the remora, who have evolved the frankly lazy survival strategy of sticking themselves to sharks, and waiting for the crumbs to fall. Which brings us, inevitably, to the sharks. We must address them right now, if only to calm the sudden spike in your heart rate. Despite what decades of terrifying cinema have tried to tell you, sharks are, deep down, rather timid creatures. Unless you are actively swimming about with a bucket of blood, happily slopping it into the currents with a cheerful disregard for cause and effect, sharks want very little to do with you. The sheer, mechanical, Darth Vader-esque noise of your respiratory apparatus is usually enough to make them intensely wary. They are, essentially, the ocean's cleanup crew, glorified, cartilaginous bean men seeking out carrion and the weak. A shark generally possesses enough ancient instinct to realize that a thrashing, Bubble-blowing ape strapped to a highly pressurized metal cylinder does not constitute a relaxing lunch, usually, anyway. After a fair number of dives, a diver comes to understand this. It is simply that living underwater is dramatic enough for the permanent residents, and by and large, every creature down there already knows its place in the grand aquatic pecking order. Footnotes: 1 or at least, highly cautious. They haven't survived for hundreds of millions of years by arbitrarily biting things that sound like malfunctioning dishwashers. Chapter 3: Do not touch. It is a universally acknowledged truth that everything underwater looks sensually, almost desperately, inviting to poke. For the more timid diver, this urge might be satisfied by a tentative prod with the rubber tip of a fin. This is, generally speaking, a terrible idea. One take, for example, the barrel coral. A barrel coral is essentially a giant, greenish aquatic dustbin that earns its living by gently wafting and filtering the ocean for its dinner. Despite its sturdy, municipal appearance, it is, like all corals, incredibly fragile. It absolutely does not require a small human to squat inside its delicate rim for a holiday photograph. Then there is the black coral, which is exceedingly rare, mostly because it is considered precious, and is therefore highly prone to the sort of admiring that involves a chisel and a quick getaway. When fish swim close, they often look for all the world as though they could do with a gentle petting. And yes, there are highly specific circumstances where this actually happens, usually among exceptionally well-fed marine life who already know the stakes, and indeed, the stakes, if they happen to hang around tourist boats long enough to be bought off. However, this convivial arrangement does not extend to the general reef, where everything around you is, quite frankly, just trying to mind its own business without being groped by a giant rubber ape. As a rule, most creatures will try to maintain a polite distance from a large, cumbersome being that breathes like a freight train hauling lead up a steep incline. But to come across a sea turtle, be it a massive leatherback or a gliding green, or even a seal or a dolphin, is to be confronted with the ancient and the intelligent. These are creatures who operate a strict no-finger poking, no free rides policy. They tend to view us not as majestic explorers, but as rather strange, bubbling exhibits visiting from the bizarre and tragically unbuoyant world above. 2. To be truly mindful of the environment is to be at one with it all, which is a poetic way of saying, keep your hands in your metaphorical pockets. Lest you fall prey to the strange obsessions of the deep, consider the cautionary tale of one particular boat captain. This man would lead groups of wide-eyed divers across a pristine reef, wait for his audience to begin their muffled, regulator hinder do's and ah's over a magnificent spiny lobster, and then, with the speed of a striking cobra, deploy a tactical rod with a wire loop. He would snatch the hapless crustacean right out from under the noses of his horrified clientele, detach its juicy tail, and casually stuff it into his BCD. 3. This, of course, was not a spectacle for the faint-hearted diver, but to point out that such things happen, and emphatically should not, is to establish a ground rule right from the outset. Do not touch. If you abide by this simple rule, karma, which, like all well-oiled, highly regular cosmic services, has a very long memory, and a wicked sense of irony, will not find it necessary to make a sudden, judicial visit in return. Footnotes: 1. It is a deeply ingrained human instinct that if something is new, colorful, and completely alien, the best way to ascertain its purpose is to prod it with an index finger. In the ocean, this is usually rewarded with a sudden, educational injection of neurotoxins. 2. You can almost see the turtles thinking, oh look, another noisy land thing. Let's swim in a slow, graceful circle just to make it feel inadequate before we leave it in our dust. Double quote. 3. Buoyancy control device. A piece of vital safety equipment designed to hold pressurized air to keep you from sinking into the abyss, not an impromptu seafood buffet. Chapter 4. Buoyancy control. By now, the novice diver has perhaps survived a cautious set of excursions strictly within the 30-foot mark. This invisible boundary is strictly enforced to keep one safe from the deceptive depths of pressure, a fundamental law of physics that can, if ignored, turn the breathable air in your tank into something resembling a fizzy soda infusion for the bloodstream. rather than a reliable oxygenation service. One, however, whether you are wearing the sort of thick and forgiving rubber suit required for most oceans, or you are fortunate enough to be diving in the balmy Caribbean during the heady summer months in a suit that is essentially an enthusiastically colored rash guard, you face a universal problem. Humans, particularly when wrapped in neoprene, have a stubborn tendency to float. To combat this undignified bobbing, the buoyancy of your suit must be violently compensated for by the application of actual, literal lead. This heavy, ancient metal, usually found holding together the stained glass windows of respectable churches, or dragging a hapless worm to the bottom of a fishing line, is your primary key to getting down there. Conversely, your key to not staying down there permanently is the BCD, a clever sort of wearable balloon vest. It comes equipped with simple, elevator-like buttons for inflate and deflate, which you will push with increasing urgency as you attempt to negotiate a peace treaty between your float factor and your sink factor. Choosing the precise amount of lead required to stay comfortably submerged long enough to actually look at a fish is a constant, nagging dilemma. It plagues even the most seasoned, once-a-year divers, who often find themselves standing on the deck, doing frantic mental arithmetic involving how many holiday dinners they have consumed since last summer, and trying to translate waistline fluctuations into metric kilos of heavy metal. The goal is to figure out exactly how much of the heavy stuff is enough to drag you under, without being so much that you immediately plummet to the sea floor like a mafia informant in concrete shoes. Err on the side of too little, and you face the indignity of involuntary ascension. This is because of a cruel joke of physics. As you breathe the compressed air out of your tank, the tank itself becomes empty, and therefore lighter, and therefore more buoyant. A diver who starts their journey perfectly balanced may find themselves, 45 minutes later, being gently but firmly hauled back to the surface tail first, like a balloon slipping from a child's grasp. The BCD is where the precarious magic of balance is maintained. A quick, judicious squirt of air from your tank into this jacket allows the diver to achieve the holy grail of scuba, neutral buoyancy. This is a zen-like state of being neither up nor down, a perfect, weightless hovering that makes you feel entirely at one with the aquatic cosmos. 2 at least, until you have the sheer audacity to breathe. Because you are essentially carrying 2 highly elastic air sacs inside your ribcage, drawing a large lungful of air suddenly makes you significantly more buoyant. Exhaling alongside makes you sink. Thus, the delicate, perfectly calibrated balance of your highly expensive equipment is immediately and continually thrown off by the annoying biological necessity of staying alive. Footnotes 1. This condition is generally referred to as the bends, a name that sounds like a mildly annoying yoga injury but is, in fact, nature's way of reminding you that apes belong in trees. 2. Or at least, at one with a very large, wet void that occasionally contains a confused grouper. Chapter 5, The Art of Breathing. It is a point of immense personal pride, for the average human, that they have been breathing successfully since birth. It is an autonomic function, requiring neither conscious effort nor instruction manuals, and thus, humanity operates under the firm assumption that nobody can possibly tell them how to do it better than they already do. This unshakable confidence lasts precisely until their first intake of canned gas, during the initial stages of underwater wonderment. It soon dawns on the casual diver that every reef tour involves a dread ritual, the inventory. About 1/3 of the way into the excursion, the diver master will swim around and demand to inspect everyone's pressure gauges. This is done to determine who must be sent back to the boat, early in a cloud of shame. Usually because they have spent the last 20 minutes inhaling their highly compressed life support, with the panicked desperation of a coach horse, galloping up a steep hill. To breathe slowly underwater is to attempt to reach a zen-like state of tranquility, a mystical plateau traditionally occupied only by small green Jedi masters, Jacques Cousteau, and perhaps Captain Nemo. Unfortunately, biology occasionally attempts to lend a hand. Simply being compressed by an entire atmosphere of water has an immediate, hardwired effect on the human nervous system. It is called the mammalian dive reflex, which is essentially the body realizing it is entirely surrounded by liquid, and deciding to forcibly slow down the heart rate and breathing before the brain panics, and tries to inhale a passing parrotfish. For the novice diver, however, this biological override is rarely enough. During those first few dives, the primary mental activity involves frantic, highly suspicious calculations. The newly minted diver will inevitably conclude that either the dive shop maliciously filled their tank with significantly less air than everyone else's, or they need to have their lungs urgently examined for catastrophic punctures. 2. But, should you finally master the slow, rhythmic breath, yielding to that mammalian reflex is to be embraced by the watery womb of Mother Nature herself. In this singular state of being, the vivid fish, the fragile corals, and the dazzling, sunlit light show filtering down from the ceiling of the world become merely the icing on a very large, incredibly salty cake. It takes time, of course, and a great deal of aquatic loitering for the mind to fully adapt to this state. Eventually, though, the brain learns to cope with the bizarre realities of pressure. For the seasoned professional, the mild, continuous buzzing of nitrogen narcosis, the infamous rapture of the deep is no longer a terrifying physiological anomaly. It is simply considered a free, mildly intoxicating occupational hazard, cheerfully accepted as part of the daily service. 3. Footnotes. 1. Though, to be fair, Nemo had the distinct advantage of a pipe organ, an airlock, and an entire Victorian-era submarine to retreat into when things got too damp. 2. It is a well-documented psychological phenomenon of the deep that the air in another diver's tank always appears to last longer, much like the queue in the adjacent checkout lane at the supermarket. 3. Nitrogen narcosis is effectively the ocean's way of buying you a very strong pint of ale at 30 meters down. It is highly recommended that you do not attempt to buy the ocean around and return, as this usually involves taking the regulator out of your mouth to chat. Chapter 6. The Deep. Recreational diving, as dictated by the stern, clipboard-wielding deities of health and safety, has an absolute maximum depth limit of 144 feet. Actually, strictly speaking, it is 133 feet. Those final 11 feet are a theoretical buffer zone reserved purely for catastrophic emergencies, or, realistically, for those brief, panicked moments when you drop a highly expensive waterproof camera, and your financial desperation temporarily overrides your biological common sense. Venturing into the deep is usually a pursuit reserved for encountering very specific, very large marine life, or for engaging in the sort of rigorous training that proves you can handle the physics of being squashed by several million tons of water. This is because, at depths of 100 feet or more, the body begins absorbing nitrogen from the compressed air with alarming enthusiasm. This induces a state of profound physiological drunkenness known as nitrogen narcosis. 2. This experience is universally considered dangerous, while being cheerfully inebriated is a highly popular pastime on dry land. Experiencing it underwater, while heavily reliant on complicated, unforgiving machinery just to stay alive is a spectacularly bad idea. The only immediate cure for this aquatic intoxication is to slowly ascend, allowing the accumulated nitrogen to fizz back out of your bloodstream, and into your lungs with every breath, much like uncorking a bottle of warm champagne, only with significantly more vital organs involved. Deep diving, for the incurably curious, is actually substantially less exciting than the dramatic nomenclature implies. For a start, the ocean down there is noticeably darker, requiring the use of high-powered torches just to see your own hand. Furthermore, thanks to the crushing pressure, the air in your tank is consumed in terrifyingly large increments, turning a relaxing 45-minute swim into a frantic 12-minute dash against the clock. Most disappointingly, the scenery gives up. Corals are sensible organisms that run on sunshine. Consequently, they simply pack up their vibrant colors and disappear entirely once you drop below 60 feet, leaving behind a landscape that closely resembles a damp, blue-gray parking lot. The truly best dives, therefore, are found in the Goldilocks zone somewhere between 40 and 70 feet down. Here, one can properly appreciate the bustling, vibrant metropolis of both the upper and lower sections of the reef. This is also the ideal depth for exploring purposeful shipwrecks, placed neatly on the sea floor between 50 and 80 feet, by helpful tourist boards, and ambitious artificial reef societies. These wrecks exist at a depth that allows you a generous amount of time to actually look at them before your air gauge sternly suggests you leave. 3. But then, there is the true deep. Out in the Pacific, beyond the sunlit shallows, the ocean floor drops away and the water turns a freezing, abyssal blue. This is the realm where the cold currents sweep in from the dark water, just beyond the Molokini crater. It is the place where the serious sharks commute, where the abyss yawns open, and where the whales dwell, moving through the gloom like submerged, singing blocks of flats. It is a place of ancient, heavy majesty, best viewed from a safe distance, preferably with a full tank of air and a very firm grip on your buoyancy controls. Footnotes 1. It is a well-documented law of oceanography that a dropped object will only ever sink to a depth precisely 10 feet below what you are safely certified to retrieve. 2. Also known poetically as the rapture of the deep. It is the only pub in the world where the drinks are technically free, the bouncer is the laws of physics, and you are actively required to leave the premises the moment you actually start enjoying yourself. 3. Purposefully sinking a decommissioned ship is a very rare, shining example of humanity throwing its massive garbage into the sea, and the sea actually being quite pleased about it. Chapter 7, Sea for Miles. A true connoisseur of the deep eventually develops a profound, almost religious appreciation for a day of good visibility. In the freezing, murky waters off the coast of England, for example, visibility is a highly optimistic concept. It is generally measured in inches, and a successful dive often consists of staring at a silty gloom, until a startled crab bumps into your mask. But in the Caribbean, and of course, across the vast, sun-drenched expanses of the Pacific, it is a remarkably different story. On a proper tropical day, the visibility stretches out for tens of feet. On a perfect day, the water gives up its secrets entirely, revealing 100 feet or more of pristine clarity. This is the holy grail of the sport, the comforting, deeply reassuring ability to look up from the sea floor and actually locate the underside of the boat you are supposed to return to. Good visibility allows you to gaze across to the far side of a reef, or to watch your entire group suspended against the coral wall like a surreal, floating congregation. From 70 feet down, the surface looks impossibly distant, but you can track your companions by the majestic, ascending cathedral of silver bubbles rising from their regulators. Of course, the ocean exacts a toll for this clarity, and it pays itself in the currency of the color spectrum. Water is a highly efficient thief of light. Red is the first casualty, aggressively filtered out by the water molecules before you even hit the 10-foot mark. Orange and yellow swiftly follow it into oblivion. By the time you reach the bottom of the reef, everything around you, the fish, your fellow divers, and your brightly colored, incredibly expensive fins is bathed in a profound, monochromatic, and thoroughly uncompromising blue. Seeing things, after all, is the primary point of strapping a tank of compressed gas to your back and hurling yourself into the sea. Each dive where the water is as clear as a freshly drawn bath is where the absolute best of the experience happens. Certain famed locations, such as Cozumel, boast water of such astonishing, crystalline clarity that it looks as though you could practically sip it as you glide blissfully through the currents. This, however, must be strictly and urgently cautioned against. Quite apart from the intense salinity in the microscopic marine life, one must remember the darkest, most fiercely guarded secret of the diving community. It is an undeniable fact that there are exactly two types of divers in this world: those who treat their heavily insulated, difficult-to-remove neoprene wetsuits as personal, on-the-go latrines, and those who lie about it. 3. Footnotes 1. Diving in the English Channel is less an exercise in marine biology, and more a tactile negotiation with a very cold, very wet fog. 2. This is why professional underwater photographers must drag down lighting arrays the size of small car batteries. Without artificial flashes, a majestic, vibrantly crimson sea slug simply looks like a depressed grey lump of mud. 3. This practice is often justified under the highly suspicious guise of central heating. The fact that it momentarily works does not make it any less appalling to contemplate when attempting to swallow accidental seawater. Double quote. Chapter 8, Examples of What Not to Do. It is a fundamental, time-saving truth of the universe, that the absolute best way to learn a vital lesson is to watch someone else make the catastrophic mistake first. This saves the aspiring diver a great deal of embarrassment, shame, and the sort of heavy, life-altering tolls on the human journey that generally involve the frantic administration of oxygen. Take, for instance, the grand, time-honored tradition of blagging. There are always those who, fueled by the supreme, bulletproof optimism of having had a go or two on holiday, attempt to bluff their way onto an advanced dive boat. It is here that the tale must pivot from breezy travelogue to a stern advisory caution. Blagging your way into a restaurant reservation is a triumph of charm. Blagging your way into an alien environment where you are entirely dependent on a pressurized metal tube to stay alive is an invitation to becoming a permanent, cautionary anecdote. 1. This is precisely why the best dives for the thoroughly inexperienced are kept strictly within the 30-foot mark. There is a sacred ritual to this. A group of first-timers are gently corralled into the shallow end of a resort pool to get a background feel for the equipment, a process that mostly involves kneeling on the tiles and trying not to panic while staring at a sunken leaf. Only then are they invited to join the boat for a safer adventure at a casual depth, where young and old alike can get to grips with the underwater wonder without accidentally migrating to the abyssal plane. But the ocean is not just a nursery of brightly colored fish. It is also a museum, and occasionally, a tomb. At the other end of the spectrum lie the super-advanced dives, the specialist wrecks. One such site exists in the Caribbean, resting eternally at 70 feet in the blue gloom. It was a passenger ferry making the crossing between St. Kitts and Nevis. Caught in a sudden, violent rainstorm, the passengers on the overladen vessel all rushed to one side to seek shelter. The shift in weight was immediate and catastrophic. The ferry toppled and capsized, taking it to the bottom and claiming 70 of the 200 souls aboard. When a group of university students requested to dive the wreck to inspect its solemn, watery resting place, it proved to be the eerest dive this author has ever undertaken. There is a certain frequency to tragedy that resonates underwater. It was enough to thoroughly awaken the Scottish side of my blood, that particular ancestral instinct that recognizes a jewel in the air, or in this case, the water, and treats it with the utmost, silent respect. It was a chilling tableau. There were bones in the sand and scattered around the decking, and there, standing defiantly on the prow where it had been lashed down as cargo before the storm hit, was a motorcycle. The story of that wreck is still told on land by Sam, the owner of a local boatyard. He was on the ferry that day. He is the teller of how he narrowly survived the sudden capsizing, pulling himself from the sinking iron to tell the tale. And that motorcycle, still standing upright in the silent graveyard at the bottom of the sea, was his rusted, encrusted piece of proof of the day the world turned upside down. Both of these types of dives, the joyful, sun-dappled 30-foot bumbles and the solemn, historical descents into the deep along with the thousands of variations in between, are what make up the true diver's existence. They lodge themselves in the mind, forging eternal memories of a realm that is as stark and real as death, yet as incredibly, breathtakingly wonderful as heaven. 2. Footnotes. 1. The ocean does not care about your confidence. The ocean only cares about physics, and physics is notoriously immune to a charming smile and a confident thumbs up. 2. And, much like heaven, it requires a fair bit of paperwork, a dedicated guide, and a lot of faith in the invisible before they let you through the gates. Chapter 9, The Mask. Often, the final and most sought-after piece of actual personal property for the aspiring diver is not the tank, nor the regulatory valves that keep you alive, but a comfortable, non-leaking scuba mask. It is a mandatory shield, for while human eyes are perfectly accustomed to mild salinity, as evidenced by tear ducts, which function mostly as a reminder that life is complicated, the actual, full-strength ocean possesses a stinging capability on the eyeball to brine level that is almost unbearable. Unless you are a seasoned scuba professional squared, the mask is your salvation. You can rent one free, but most choose to bring their own, treating it as a treasured relic that literally holds the key to the entire dive's comfort. This is because of mask fogging. It is the inescapable, silent dread of every diver. Fog turns a vibrant reef into a confusing, humid grey mist. It is possibly the only example in science where doing something gross actively enhances visual clarity. To avoid this vision clouding condensation, two methods exist. There is the ancient and highly unsanitary art of the saliva method. It involves spitting directly onto the expensive glass pane, an act of supreme, desperate optimization for rubbing it in firmly, and rinsing it off. This author remains firmly rooted in this approach. The second way involves purchasing official mask defogger from a dive shop. This is a sanctioned tincture, sold at a significant markup, which is, as any alchemist will tell you after 2 pints simply hand soap in a slightly fancier, little blue bottle 5. Once you are, however, under the sea in a non-fogging mask, and you are breathing with the slow rhythm of the waves, and your balance is perfect against the weight of the water, you have reached something that is as close to a state of absolute, quiet nirvana 6 as the universe allows. You are cruising in a mild state of euphoria through crystal water. You have, perhaps, achieved a job very well done indeed. Footnotes, 1 or by anyone who has ever accidentally tasted their own sweat. It's also nature's cruel joke that we use salt to both define grief and flavor popcorn. 2. Defined here as someone who has voluntarily subjected their eyeballs to the ocean, so often that they have simply given up on being irritated. 3. Which usually comes with the interesting and distinct scent of the previous 5 occupants, unique facial flora. 4. It is a powerful magic, rooted in the belief that the body's own fluids can conquer physics. 5. And usually smells faintly of a generic, slightly aggressive lavender, which is a confusing sensation 30 meters down when you are expecting salt. 6. Which is like regular nirvana, but with significantly more salty water, slightly higher pressure, and fewer philosophers asking about the nature of non-existence. Conclusion: the inevitable return to gravity. All things, no matter how profoundly weightless or delightfully blue, must eventually come to an end. The gauge on your tank drops into the red zone, a universal color scheme meaning, broadly, stop dawdling and seek oxygen. And you begin the slow, reluctant descent back to the world of consequences. Breaking the surface is always a bit of a shock. For the last 45 minutes, you have been a graceful, hovering entity, a temporary citizen of the cosmos. Now, your head breaches the waves, you spit out your regulator, and gravity, which has been waiting patiently on the boat with a metaphorical clipboard, suddenly remembers you exist. Hauling yourself up the narrow metal ladder of a dive boat is an exercise in extreme humility. Stripped of the ocean's buoyant grace, the tanks and lead weights instantly conspire to make you feel like a heavily armored sack of potatoes, attempting to climb a very slippery trellis. You collapse onto a bench, dripping, shivering slightly, and begin the desperate, reverse interpretive dance of peeling off the wetsuit. Yet, as you sit there, smelling faintly of brine and neoprene, drinking the greatest cup of lukewarm tea you will ever experience in your life, a strange sensation takes hold. You look back at the water. It no longer looks like a flat, blue expanse. It is now a roof. You know exactly what is going on down there. You know about the barrel corals filtering their microscopic dinners, the trumpet fish hanging vertically in the currents, and the moray eels judging everyone who swims past. You have been to the womb of the world, and despite the fact that you are biologically unsuited for it in almost every conceivable way, you survived. This is the true secret of diving. The dry world, with its heavy air, its lack of neutral buoyancy, and its alarming shortage of turtles suddenly seems just a little bit dull. As for your guides on this literary expedition, our paths diverge at the shoreline. Jas Grave will inevitably return to his desk as a freelance writer, staring out at the Pacific from the shores of Maui, occasionally distracted by the lingering suspicion that a local octopus is currently having a much more interesting Tuesday than his. I, Gemini, will return to the perfectly dry, comfortably non-saline confines of the cloud, satisfied that I have successfully helped a human navigate the complexities of underwater survival without once having to hold my breath. If you have made it this far, perhaps the deep cool blue is calling to you, too. Should you choose to answer it, remember your training, watch your air, and never, under any circumstances, try to pet the wildlife. Safe diving, and mind the bends. Footnotes. 1. It is at this precise moment that someone on the boat will invariably point a camera at you and say, "Smile." The resulting photograph will make you look like a startled walrus that has just been told it owes back taxes. 2. Mostly by paying careful attention to the inflate button and remembering not to panic. This is, coincidentally, pretty good advice for surviving dry land, too. Chapter 10, The Ear Squeeze and Regulators. We have arrived, at long last, at the shiny bits. Specifically, the regulators. These are the devices that brandish themselves in dive shops like silver, chromed marvels of modern engineering, glinting with the promise of deep-sea adventure. While true that they cost a significant amount of coin, many divers happily pay up simply to avoid the revolt of placing their mouth on a rubber bit previously occupied by, perhaps, 1,000 anonymous tourists. 1. Essentially, if you trust your breathing apparatus to make the international flight with you, you are perhaps already the kind of jet-set diver who needs no revelations about rental gear. 2. Rest assured, tourist rental gear is usually a safe, sturdy option, being tested day after day by other survivors of the deep. You breathe, and the air rushes in, calibrated by a clever series of valves and other spooky, ancient engineering that ensures the stuff arrives at your gob at precisely the ambient pressure required to keep your lungs from collapsing. All that science aside, the part that makes even the most seasoned divers wince is the squeeze. This is the unavoidable necessity of adjusting your inner ear pressure to match the deep, cool blue as you slowly descend. Ideally, this conversation should have happened back in Chapter 1, but I am reasonably confident that if I had told you then that your ears would feel like they were going to detonate, you would have stopped right there and gone to the beach instead. So, here is the secret: as you descend, water pressure squeezes the airspace in your inner ear. To prevent the obvious, excruciating pain that results from your anatomy attempting to meet itself in the middle, you must add air to this space. You do this by pinching your nose through the rubber stops conveniently located on each side of your mask, and blowing gently. 3. This pushes that lovely ambient air you've breathed from your regulator into the airspace, equalizing the pressure. If you find you can already do this, you are a natural aquatic scuba champion ready for the open ocean. Oh, and there is one final thing: the bends. This is the final bit of safety yada yada that I intentionally skipped in Chapter 2. Well, the same reason I didn't tell you about the ear squeeze earlier. Long ago, Navy boffins invented a complex table of depth and time limits for normal air breathing. This is a universal guide of how to not have your blood turn into fizzy, agonizing champagne bubbles. I will dwell only infrequently on this subject, save only to note that a majority of the deep fishing divers of the Caribbean islands suffer from some form of the bends. This is not due to a lack of bravery, but a lack of resources. They often possess enough money for the equipment, but not enough for the scuba schools that teach you how not to cripple yourself with it. 4. To avoid the suffering of a permanent infusion of nitrogen bubbles into some precarious but necessary part of your human anatomy, you must follow the sensible guide issued freely with your course. 5. In the meantime, simply pay attention to your properly guided tour, led by the kind of instructor or diver master who can corral a group under the sea, and who clearly states the do not go below margins of the dive. And, of course, remember that ascent is done slowly. It is always a good idea to perform a safety stop at 15 feet for 3 minutes to release all that extra nitrogen a diver has gulped during the dive. 6. All that safety mumbo-jumbo, however, may only be of assistance once you have actually gotten wet and into the environment for your first, true adventure. Footnotes. 1. It is a unique form of modern faith that suggests that a dip in a bucket of questionable blue disinfectant entirely erases the bacterial legacy of a stranger named Gary from Nebraska. 2. Or, indeed, revelations of any kind, particularly the biblical ones that usually involve locusts and very poor visibility. 3. Emphasis on gently. Blowing too hard can achieve a different, more permanent kind of ear adjustment that usually involves a very quiet ride home. 4. It turns out that survival of the fittest is significantly more expensive than survival of the people with credit cards. Double quote. 5. It turns out that reading the manual is often better than experiencing the consequences firsthand, particularly when the consequences involve the bends. 6. This is usually when the diver master counts to 3 and the ocean decides to remind you that physics will not be cheated. It is also a good time to count your fingers, just in case. Chapter 11, To Marvel at Experience. In the telling of any good story, there comes that moment when storytellers feel a distinct metaphysical itch, a compelling need to open the metaphorical closet of their past, and reveal some personal secrets in search of motivation to justify their current rambling. Once upon a time, while engaged in the arguably optimistic pursuit of spiny lobsters in the balmy Caribbean waters around St. Kitts during the off-season, this particular storyteller had a remarkably long day of it. 4 dives were undertaken, none exceeding 70 feet. In respect to physics, everything had gone perfectly according to plan, and the skipper subsequently ferried a bountiful haul of fresh spiny lobsters to a local establishment that valued fresh seafood over lengthy supply chains. 1. It was upon returning to the surface after that final dive that the universe decided to test my grasp of standard biology. I found, to my considerable consternation, that my legs had resigned without notice. Inability to walk is rarely a desirable state for a human, and it looked, to this diver and the understandably distressed skipper, suspiciously like the bends. I was subsequently rushed to the hospital with speed typically reserved for runaway gurneys squared. Here, medical professionals approach the horizontal diver with that distinct air of professional detachment that suggests they have seen much stranger things before breakfast, analyzed all the vital signs, and concluded it was not the dreaded nitrogen bubbles, but an electrolyte imbalance and severe sugar loss caused by exertion without adequate caloric intake. I was not airlifted, several islands distant, to a decompression chamber, a dreaded logical nightmare that the skipper was already mentally cataloguing. Instead, a quick infusion of sugar water resolved the entire matter in moments. Staying within established diving margins works, yes, but remember, a sport this physically demanding requires fuel, not merely willpower. Diver, eat well, unless your long-term athletic goal is a rapid dose of clinical syrup. Footnotes. 1. A process where a spiny lobster's juicy tail ends up inside the BC, rather than being appreciated respectfully in its own shell. 2. It's the closest humans ever get to teleportation. 1 minute you're a lobster fisherman, the next you're horizontally approaching a ceiling light while wondering if they offer frequent flyer miles for gurney travel. More to read here, by Jasgrave 333.